our sound recording. Bwana Maina, karibu, you can take your seat here. Okay, karibu. That I have decided to send somebody to come for you because I knew where you are. So as you're waiting for everybody to be on board, I'm just trying to make a bit of introductory on intellectual property. Then from there we had sound recordings around 1920s. Then we had integrated cinema, where you could combine the sound and the moving images. Then the birth of radio around 1920s. 1927 actually, that's when radio was introduced to Kenya. Then television, 1930. Then photocopying came. We had cassette players, VCRs, CDs and DVDs. And then internet came from 1980s. And now we are moving beyond internet. The question that we'll be asking ourselves is how do we appropriate the works of art at the age of internet? And I think Dr. Kamau is going to give us that. But ideally, what is the intellectual property? And we have said, and we have different forms of intellectual property categories. One of them is called patent, and this is normally provided in inventions, anything to do with invention that has got inventive steps, and it can be duplicated industrially, and normally it's given by KIPI, Kenya Industrial Property Institute. And this has to do with like machines, processes, like even the drugs and also and so on and so forth. Then we have trademarks. Trademarks, they're regulated under the Trademark Act of Kenya. And this has to do with the signs, like KTN, that's a trademark, NTV is a trademark. And then we have the industrial designs. Everything has got a design. Like this bottle of water, the way it is designed, this is protected, this particular design. And this is also protected under what we call Industrial Properties Act of Kenya. Then we come now to the copyright. And I think copyright is what we'll be discussing more. And copyright protects things like literary work, music, audiovisual works, like whatever you have in the films and so on and so forth. Then from there we have, and it's protected under Copyright Act of 2001. And then from there we have traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. This is a new form of protection that came from 2016. The traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. And geographical indications. Geographical indications, we don't have a law like that in Kenya, geographical indications, but it's a form of intellectual property. But we have plant varieties under the Seeds Act of Kenya. With that, I wish to welcome Dr. Kamau, who is an associate professor at Aga Khan University, to give us our keynote on the topic that is intellectual property and internet regulation, are content developers getting a raw deal. Daktari, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished guests, panelists. Thank you to the Media Council for this opportunity to share a couple of thoughts. And thank you, moderator, for laying the foundation of intellectual property. I know that so that we can jump straight into the specifics. I was told to share a couple of thoughts that would help provoke discussions and reactions from the panelists, perhaps as they also introduce other perspectives. I want to base my remarks around 4 primary arguments, core arguments. The first one, because the topic is intellectual property and internet regulation. The second part, which I guess is the one of most of interest, is are content developers getting critical and an enabler to Kenya's development, if we can appreciate it, that, and keeping in mind the theme, information is public good. The second primary argument that I want to make is that we must create an enabling environment for content creation to thrive through removing regulatory and administrative barriers. The third argument related to the previous one is that we have to protect the space for independent content producers. And lastly, which I think is quite significant, and I'll also dwell a little bit on this, is we have to enable, facilitate these people to earn recognition and financial benefits from what they create. So I will make my arguments around those major issues. So maybe to get into it, Kenya, across Africa, is recognized as a hub, is a flood of content, if we can say that. Partly because of the globally recognized high volume of social media activity. But in the recent past, and I think this is quite significant, around COVID-19, we have noted there has been a greater hunger and consumption and uptake of content online, all manner of content. There's been a greater hunger for information. Part of it, of course, is related around health, around entertainment, and other issues. But the other thing that I want to observe is that there is a wide range of content that is available from different sources, playing a very key role. As the chairman of Media Council earlier said, almost up to 500 journalists have exited the media space in the last 1 year. I think that's a remark that was made. Where are they? And it's a study I've always wanted to do, by the way, where journalists go when they exit the space. It's an interesting one, actually, just to find out where they are and what they are doing with whatever knowledge and experience they have. But I think you've seen the proliferation of YouTube channels from some of these people as a way, perhaps to continue with their desire to broadcast or share information, and perhaps continue with a passion, but as also a source of livelihood. A wide range of content that is available from alternative media sources in terms of disseminating news, content on platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and that is IGTV, Twitter, and even own domain websites. And I think many of us have come across this. But what is interesting about these emerging, platforms and avenues for people is that they are questioning official narratives. They are also upsetting journalistic norms because they play by slightly different standards. They are shaping alternative journalism approaches, and partly because their model is different. In other words, mainstream media outlets are not the only avenues. And therefore, when we talk about production and dissemination of news and other kinds of information, it goes beyond just the traditional journalism. My argument is that this is a good thing. And perhaps even for media houses and those people who may not appreciate, these content creators and content developers are likely to even become more prominent and play even a more prominent role in the next 3 to 5 years. And like I said, it's actually good for development if you think about it. Now, skipping the legal arguments that my brother attempted to make, and I think Henry will be able to make better arguments around that. Perhaps now, as we talk about all these different people that are creating content, what has been the approach, our approach to dealing with these media houses, the government, the structures that exist? What has been our approach? And I think it's an important question because when we talk about their production, reproduction, distribution, communication of this material, but also even the ownership of this, and there are quite a number of questions. But I want to take you back to something that happened not long ago. When Ruben Kigame, on his Twitter, said that if you get to a place where you eventually die, please make sure nobody from government MCSK, and Kekoko do not allow them to speak in my funeral. And he said, I've been producing music from 1987, 29 albums, but I only get about 18,000. And he said, my music receives airplay all over. It triggered a conversation that is not just specific to musicians. 2 days later, I saw another musician, Kwame Brigade, who issued, a circular or something and told media houses not to play his music without, talking to him or getting the proper license. And of course, it introduces another conversation that is important about how this will fulfill. Now, I was privileged not long ago to go to a forum where I found musicians. And while it was a social event, we were discussing something different. They started raising these issues and the concerns that they had. But in preparation for this particular forum, I had a chat with some of these emerging content creators, the YouTubers, people who are generating content. When I listened to them, the same concerns they have are the same concerns that musicians raised in that particular forum I attended. And therefore, I felt it's important perhaps to identify what are the issues, and then we can see. Hopefully, we'll get responses or reactions to them. You also remember this song we're calling Firirinda that many people perhaps may not have understood, but it seems to have captured the mood and people are talking about Firirinda. Related to the Jerusalem challenge, Coco issued a warning saying that utilizing the song without permission constitutes infringement of copyright. But what I did is I took an extra step and went to visit the old man. I had a different reason for visiting him. And he had all these concerns raising about, the fact that it was not benefiting, despite the fact that this was, the song was receiving airplay and everybody was talking about Verena. So here's a question. I want to respond now straight to the question. Are content developers getting a raw deal? The answer is yes. But why? What are the reasons? So I'll give you around 5 or 6 reasons, and then make some recommendations, and then after that, I can wait to the panelists to react to this. The first one is that there is glaring ignorance around the existence of Kenya's regulatory and institutional framework on intellectual property. It's an ongoing debate. So we have to start there. In terms of just the ignorance, people don't even know. And that is why you saw even just recently when Eric Omondi and his wife Material show that basically, there were concerns that emerged, but you might also discover in the public debate that followed, there is glaring ignorance, like I say. The second one, and this is out of conversations with some of these content creators, is what you would call middlemen. They create content, a lot of effort, especially those who do it professionally. But what they discover is there are so many middlemen between them and the people who are willing to pay for it. Media stations would qualify in this case as middlemen for these content, independent content creators. The platforms, because they don't control the platforms where this content ends up, that is YouTube, Facebook, whatever. But what is of concern and why they call them middlemen is because the revenue does not get to the creators directly. It is paid to these middlemen who benefit significantly, whether it's a Safaricom, Skiza, and the percentages they take and what ends up getting to these content creators. But the second one, which I think we can do something about, is licenses and the fees that are required. If you just look at information online about KFCB, and I saw Dr. Ezekiel Mutwe in the other room, you can see all the manner of fees that are required of this. Even the registration of intellectual property, power, the requirement, the costs are prohibitive, they are determined. So the registration fees, the filming fees, the payment per episode that is, developed, the location fees, the licenses that these people have to acquire. When you put all those things together in the narrative, I actually had to ask some of these guys, then why are you still doing what you do? Because it takes up a significant portion. And if we want to encourage, because remember I say, this is good for Kenya's development. For us to encourage these people, then we have to look into this issue. So I think the cost of intellectual property registration is 1,000 hour, which is a deterrent for those people who are not able to do this. It can only allow the big players. The other one is unfavorable tax regime, if you can talk about it. Google now has notified YouTube content creators about some changes in terms of how tax, even for people residing outside the US, that there will be deductions from June. In Kenya, the digital service tax. So what happens, just to give an example, when a content creator or a content developer comes up with SWAP, remember I said it doesn't control the platform, and therefore these platforms or the middlemen, we say, depending, for example, YouTube will take up to 55%. In the case of Skiza, I'm not sure the specifics, but I think it's something between 70 and 30%. Whatever is left, that is what he has to use to pay the licenses and the fees that I spoke about and the taxes that are related. Which means, therefore, that all mainstream commercial enterprises and their associates and affiliates are able to derive financial and other resources from this enterprise. It discourages upcoming people who are not established. There's also the issue of lack of capacity, both in terms of for young and upcoming ones, which still disadvantages anybody who may want to enter into this space. And remember what we said, the idea is this is good for Kenya's development, the information. The last point there is the content creation industry is also not well organized. This now focuses on them in terms of protecting the rights of these individuals. They're not organized, the script writers, the directors, the producers, the artists. They're not very well organized, and you always find issues around that. So the argument here, therefore, and this is what perhaps the panelists will react to, how do we give statutory expression to the rights of the creators and innovators in their creations and innovations, balanced against the public interest in accessing creations and innovations? How do we promote creativity and innovation, and therefore contribute to economic and social development, because I said it's related? Here are some practical considerations for us, and then I'll leave it at that. One, I said earlier, we need an enabling environment that encourages content development, which I said is critical to Kenya's development. For the longest time, we have seen our approach to regulation, and I think Henry will agree with me, has always been to punish violations rather than facilitating. So when somebody like Eric Omondi violates certain standards, codes that exist, that is the time now we see the hand of regulation. I would say we need an appealing grassroots incentive-based approach to intellectual property regulation. KECOBO and the other regulatory agencies, they are mandated with the administration and enforcement of copyright and related issues, which includes organizing legislation on copyright and related rights, conducting training on copyright and related rights, enlightening and informing the public. And that is why I spoke about self-education. And therefore, our approach to regulation has to be towards empowering people. That also calls now for looking at these fees, the licenses, revisiting them. They could be entered into partnership. Instead of Nairobi County, for example, it has pushed many people from creating content from Nairobi. They have gone to Embu and other places. It's because of the fees that are imposed. What if there was partnership to promote and market Nairobi, the tourism and other things, by allowing these people, because remember, there's so much we know about America because of their Hollywood industry. Even the things we believe is advanced. You can use that to advance things that are beneficial to Kenya if we can facilitate this with. So I'm talking about scrapping or revising the registration and other fees to expand the registration base for intellectual. A nominal fee can be placed on the profit. When they have made some profit, then you can talk about a nominal fee on the profits, not when even before somebody started. I should insist on revising the revenue sharing model, which is unfavorable and biased at this point. It disadvantages anybody who wants to enter that space. And my rallying call is that we have to protect that space for independent content creators, which means we have to acknowledge them as doing good or generating something that is good for the country. Maybe a last one, a challenge. There is a lot of talk around the BBI, the amendments. But perhaps, I don't know whether you have read the document, but Article 11, if you read the bill, it proposes to insert Article 11A, which places an obligation on the state to promote productivity through protection of intellectual property rights. I would say it's a step in the right direction if we put this in the Constitution. But perhaps it's building on that? How do we build on that? Lastly, I would want to just make a slight correction. I'm not an associate professor, assistant professor of senior lecturer. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. That is associate professor, assistant professor. Sorry, was getting it from what you have written here. Let's give him a round of applause for taking us through that. I think, Daktari, you have mentioned quite a number of issues, and you have talked about the issue of ignorance of IP. You have also talked about what is hindering this sector, issues of licenses and fees that are issued by different bodies, and the issues of taxation. You have mentioned it. I think the entertainment tax, I think it's already operational. Then there is also issue of lack of capacity and issues of maybe we are also going to hear from the other panelists of the issues of royalty payment. We talked about the issue of Kagame receiving 18,000. Is it 18,000 per year? And maybe that's a result of maybe poor royalty payment. We have also mentioned the issues of constitution, the one that is being proposed. But also we need also to note that already intellectual property rights are already enshrined in the Constitution, Article 40, subsection 5, Article 11, and Article 69. All of them talk about intellectual property. And on the definition, Article 260, it defines intellectual property as part of the property, which is a good thing. Now, I think from here we go to our next speaker. You can ventilate more on what Daktari has said, and that is Mr. Harry Siko, the growth editor, Nation Media Group. So, karibu Bwana Harry.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, MCK, for organizing this. We are glad to be here. As he said, my name is Harry Misiko. I'm the growth editor at Nation. Basically, news editor. I run the Nation on Africa platform and the Daily Nation, Monday to Friday. I'm in charge of content. Maybe I'll be more biased towards journalism, what we do with Carol more. I thank Dr. Sam for focusing more on other creative works, including music and performing arts. Ours is the pen, the paper, the newsprint, the e-paper, the content we are putting on social media and other search engines, including Google, which are the forces we are reckoning with. And I agree with Dr. Sam that yes, so far so good, we are getting a raw deal in terms of just how much content creators and publishers are getting from their sweat, their blood, their investments. It's quite hard to explain this because even the people who are taking our lunch are not in this room. And I wish next time MCK organizes such an event, we should be having at least regional representatives of Google, Facebook, and the other players also here so that they can tell us if we are just talking about things they feel we are being unfair to them or we are actually making valid points. I wish to start from where a columnist with the Bloomberg recently wrote, Alex Webb. Alex Webb, in his recent column that should have been the end of April, he opens his column by saying that many of you think Google became a multi-billion-dollar industry because of inventing algorithms and indexing content that can be searched. Also, increasingly we feel Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar industry because of social networking prowess and the wizards they have in terms of making people connect. To him, he says, these guys are what they are today, basically because of selling content that no one ever thought was valuable. And those people are sitting in this room. Bitter as it may be, we have been accused of committing the original sin, going and putting our content on the web for free from the word go, and then later on realizing that it was so precious and someone was making money, and now we have to actually recall or start entering into negotiations and agreements with them so that they can give us part of that revenue. It's a hard thing to say. From where we sit as content generators, we have armies of reporters, editors, sub-editors, media managers, and newsroom architects who are really struggling to get things done. And it pains us that someone somewhere has money that we now have to start negotiating. So then what exactly is the problem? There is a lot going on in this industry. There are reparations, corrective measures being taken by governments, but unfortunately, these things have only gained pace in the global north. In the global south, things seem to be not even, our governments and players here are still not bothered that someone has taken away too much for us to notice or continue ignoring. And I think it's a wake-up call to all of us. I understand that in Kenya and around South Africa and other progressive media economies, there are already baby steps to help us overcome the challenge of losing so much and actually getting a raw deal from what we do. So we understand that in Kenya, if you've been consuming news, you must be aware of the paywalls and platforms that leading media houses are trying to put in place. Nation, Standard, The Star is on the way, and others are trying to monetize their content. There lies one strategy that we are doing, basically taking the war of platforms to the doorsteps of Google and Facebook. Feeble and weak as they may be, it's just the initial step to do that. Because where we sit, we understand that yes, we want the world content, but there is something that we have not yet internalized well, and that's the platform. That's why Dr. Sam was saying, yes, we have a lot of good content, but reaching the consumer, we have to contract someone in between us and the consumer to now deliver that content for us. And that has also been part of the original sale. Because the fact that the people who pay for our journalism have to be served by someone else. We cook and we give our food to someone else to serve, only for them to take the credit. And that's the sorry state of, story of our media. So we realize that we have to actually tweak and change our business models, and what Standard, Nation, and the rest are doing is basically to break the original business model of riding on AdSense and other revenue streams, display ads and classifieds on Facebook, on Google and the rest, to basically go straight to the consumer and ask them, we have this food, we were the ones who have been serving all along, so we are here to enter into a contract with you. Instead of letting Google and Facebook go in between, and they take 70% and give us 30% or much, much less for those who follow those numbers. So the platforms we are trying to build have started off. We are happy that we have a few subscriptions. The two media houses are announcing their numbers, and it's good progress. But there are still challenges. The same person who has a better platform and mastered the art of building platforms is keen not to lose that war. And if you check what Google and Facebook are doing, they have now tweaked their algorithms to ensure that even the content that we put out there is not visible. So you search Kenya-centric news, breaking news on Kimali Street, but you're most likely not going to see it on Standard or Nation. You will see it elsewhere, maybe even a foreign news agency having it, because of the contracts they have entered into with the platform owners, Google and Facebook. Now that duopoly is slowly showing that it's not willing to see us build our platforms. But we are going to see how best to go about it, because it's a war that we have to win. We are delighted that in the global north, there are steps to actually see media houses also start benefiting. There are serious government interventions in France and Australia, where laws have been put in place to ensure that content generators get part of the revenue. We hope the government, I saw it in the morning, I saw parliamentarians here and other stakeholders, if we could only also create a way, as we repeal the many laws they talked about, also we rely on the provision in BBI to see how best we put in place measures to ensure that we can also come up with policies or maybe laws that will see us hold Google and the rest of the players accountable, and also just give part of that revenue to our content generators. My moderator there tells me I'm likely to overshoot. I'm ready to continue this conversation from where you give me permission. I thank you so much.
So thank you very much. That is Wanahari for that. And I think you have outlined quite pertinent issues. You have talked about the issue of original sin, what our content developers here in Kenya, maybe we were not very keen by the time when we were doing that, and now you are paying the price for having done that. I think it would have been much better. I did not have the profiles for the speakers, but now I have these profiles. Allow me just maybe to read those profiles, because I think it will be unjust not to do so. It's part of the content management. Now we are talking about the content here. And I think the person who have just spoken, right, that is Mr. Henry Minor Victor Kopio. And maybe I can start with Dr. Sam Kamau. He's an assistant professor at the Khan University Graduate School of Media and Communication. Prior to joining AKU, Sam taught at the University of Nairobi School of Journalism. He holds a PhD in Communication Studies, specializing in social media and political communication. He's also a product of the prestigious Wongozi School, based at the University of Dar es Salaam. He has a specific interest in the interaction between politics and communication, with emphasis on information power, influence, and persuasion. At AKU, he was promoted acting director of the Social Accountability Media Initiative, a program of the World Bank that supports CSOs, advocacy, and media engagement strategies, as well as working with the media to tell accountability stories. Our next speaker is Victor. He is going to join us virtually. And about Victor, Victor Kopio is a human rights and ICT lawyer based in Kenya. He has a keen interest in leadership, research, technology, social justice, and the empowerment of young people. He is a trustee of the Kenya ICT Action Network, policy think tank, where he focuses his efforts on research, advocacy, and capacity building on emerging ICT policy and on various aspects where human rights interact with technology, including internet freedom, privacy, and cybersecurity. So if Victor is around, Victor, you can join us. You can go ahead and maybe you can give us your own perspective on the topic, intellectual property and internet regulation. Are the content developers getting a road deal? Karibu, Victor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I hope you can hear me well. And in response to the question, content developers getting a road deal, I think it is fair to say that they're getting a road deal but for various reasons. Some are their own creation, others are because of the changing environment that we are in today. I think I will focus on media organizations, and I want to just to reiterate, I think the feedback from the previous presenters already have highlighted some of these critical issues, so not perhaps to go into deep detail on them. But I think at the core of this issue is a battle for advertising revenue. And like the previous speaker mentioned, Kenya content developers were sharing content for free online, and all users of the internet felt that internet was a space where you could get free content. Then suddenly they realized that they're losing money. Nobody is selling newspapers, everybody is going on Netflix. So where does the content creator fall? The mechanisms for intellectual property protection basically are created so as to protect not just the creative rights of the content creators, but also the financial rights in terms of securing how that content they create can be used. And that's why we have the whole copyright regime and trademarks and the patent, because we are protecting creation. However, our ways, or rather the ways in which we were protecting and securing these interests has been affected by how the internet has developed as a platform. We now have social media across, we have all these online services that now have changed how content was shared and how content was protected, and therefore how content needs to be protected is different. So it is important to review how we are protecting content on the internet space. That said, for news organizations, how they used to do business can be the same, and I think we have seen how nation and standard are changing, and other organizations, media organizations are changing how they are sharing, putting content to the public. That the internet has changed, or rather has created a situation where they need to change their business model, so that now they're not doing business the old way. They need to change, so that then they can take advantage of the benefits that come with the internet. Of course, at the heart of this, they meet intermediaries who've been in the game. When they were eating the entire cake, media companies are now saying we want a bit cut of the pie. And that is now the contest that we have now, that traditional media organizations now want a piece of the pie. And unfortunately, the relationship is unequal because big tech is big tech. They have the platform, they have the resources, and therefore they're not much for local media organizations who are struggling to make ends meet. But at the same time, one of the things that media organizations and other content creators need to appreciate that these platforms are worthless if they don't have any content. And therefore, the issue should be how can they then negotiate a better position and better value for the content that they put online. One alternative is to get into bed with the Googles and Facebooks of this world and ask them their fair share of revenue from whatever it is that the content they put on those platforms. Then the alternative is to leverage on the existing platforms that they have so that they can actually get revenue from them, because the failure to do so then will render them obsolete in a couple of years, because not so many people are buying newspapers anymore, and we have all these rules around how they can use content. So I think that the media organizations can leverage regulators, whether it's parliament, the communication authority, or the competition authority, to bring this big tech to the table, or to come up with regulations that will now change how they relate. We have seen this in other countries, such as in France, within the EU, and in Australia, where there is now a new regulation to make sure that big tech companies can come to the table and give local media organizations their fair share and to negotiate fairly. So I think it is important that local media organizations explore the avenues so that then they will no longer have a roadie, but at the same time they need to transform and change and innovate and do business differently from how they were operating in the past, because you can no longer do that at this point in time. So I think those are my observations, that the media enterprises should exercise their own agency to transform their positions and to engage and to negotiate with other intermediaries so that then we can realize the full potential of the content that we put here. But also to remember that these international or big tech companies are nothing if they don't have the content there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Peter, for that information that you have shared with us. And I think, is it working? And thank you very much, Victor, for that. And the next speaker, I think we are going to give you each 3 minutes because of the time. We are really constrained, is Carol Kintai, who is the digital editor at the Standard Group, a position she has held for the last 4 years. At Standard, she provides editorial oversight and guidance for digital-first multimedia content, along with coordinating their convergence with the traditional media channels. So at this point in time, Carol, you have the floor. You can give your also insights into this particular topic on intellectual property and internet regulation. Thank you. Maybe you can share the same mic. You have the mic.
Thank you for the opportunity, since I have 3 minutes. Mine is just to add on what my colleagues have said. I do agree one of the biggest challenges we face as publishers is big tech, and unfortunately we realized they were eating our cake too late. And I think that came especially because of COVID-19, when we saw advertising revenues had shrinked. And now we have been asking ourselves, how do we keep the business going? Are content developers getting a raw deal? I think for me it would be yes and no. It's not purely no. Number one is because even as you put your content on whatever platform, remember you have to sign something to say that you're actually going to put your content there. Nobody puts a gun on your head. The question is the monetization. How much are you willing to take from these guys? If you want to take the peanuts, you take the peanuts. If you don't want to take the peanuts, then you go like what RMS did. They have built their own Viusasa platform. It's going to take a long time before they get the money. You're seeing what Netflix is doing. I've seen publishers in the US are also investing in their own platforms, so that once you get into their platform, you pay for it and the broadcaster earns some money. Are we willing to invest in such platforms? I don't know. But it's perhaps something we need to think about, because if we don't and we keep just talking about these problems, the next technology innovation will find us still complaining. So that's one. Number two is something I need to say is around copyright. I think Kenyans, and we are not the only ones, we like to steal other people's work. And you find that somebody has submitted or tweeted a video and claimed they're the ones who, took the video, which is very wrong. And I must say the third-party platforms like Twitter, Facebook, actually, when you put content that does not belong to you, they actually flag you. And there's a reason they do that, because we need to protect people's work. We are notorious for that. Even on WhatsApp, you're in a group and somebody forwards information as if it's their own information. So starting with ourselves, how disciplined are we in crediting other people's work? I know you find that there are cases in court where even a corporate, I know of a certain corporate that was taken to court for using a couple's photo on their calendars. They didn't pay these people. So from that basic knowledge, are we acknowledging people's sweat? Finally, I would like to say we do really need to think around how we compensate even our content creators. I'm now seeing a lot of comedians coming on board. I think there is Kalonzo Musyoka who has gone into comedy. I don't know how much the comedians are getting. I've seen Flaco, they are cartoonists. There are people doing podcasts and putting them free on the various podcast sites. The conversation needs now to move to monetization. How can we make money out of this content? As media houses, as I conclude, we've realized that only journalism will save journalism. And so, most of you are used to getting this information for free. And now you must start thinking how you're going to pay for the production of that journalism. Because you are asking us to produce quality journalism. Quality journalism costs. And the trend now is for people to put paywalls. If you want to watch something on good content, you have to pay for your Amazon TV, you have to pay for your Apple TV, you have to pay for your Netflix. It's not free. So we are moving from a phase of free to where information has to be paid for. The big question is the people who can't afford. We're going to have an information divide. That's going to be our next big problem, that a section of the population will not be able to access quality information. So we go back to literacy levels and discussions. So that's the addition I would like to add to what my colleagues have said. And I'm grateful that now we are having this discussion around content creation. And I hope the Media Council can actually invite these players to the next sessions we have on content. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol, for that. And I think you have brought in very salient point on the issues of commodification of content. I think we are not doing that well enough. And you have also mentioned the issue of investing, putting the right amount of money into the content development and exploitation, and the issues of copyright, stealing of works. And I think you've mentioned a case, that is the case of Joel Motuma Kirimi versus NHIF, where the NHIF took a photo from Facebook and Twitter, and they used it in their brochures. And each of them, because these were a couple, were awarded 5 million each. So you can imagine how much your own photo there being used by another person. That's how much it is worth. And our next speaker is Dr. Gilbert Ogeni, Acting Assistant Director, Innovation, Research and Development, is going to join us online from the CA, that is Communications Authority. And we're also giving you 3 minutes, Daktari, so that we can delve into this matter. So we have opportunity for audience also to respond and ask questions. Karibu, Daktari.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Media Council, for organizing this event. Yeah, I think I'll be brief because my colleagues have touched on most of the areas that I was touching on. But I think I'll touch more on the issue of internet regulation, and then on the issue as to whether content creators are getting no deal and the way forward. And Chair, as you are aware, the mandate of the Communications Authority Among others is to facilitate the development of the ICT sector, which then includes broadcasting, multimedia, telecommunications, postal services, and e-commerce. So the subject of today's discussion on information as a public good fits very well within our mandate. And it also implies that information indeed is an essential good, and its provision is therefore very critical to the socio-economic development of the country. I'll not dwell very much on the issues of internet regulation, because I think there's no universal model for internet regulation the world over, and I think different countries have adopted kind of several approaches which strictly depend on the culture of the country, of the citizenship. And I think this was alluded to by our earlier speakers in the morning. But as it were, it would be good to touch on the main reasons that then lead to regulation of the internet, including national security, protection of minors, protection of human dignity, cyber incidents and crimes, and of course, the IPR issues that we are talking about at this time, among others. But I think there has been a great challenge on how to regulate the internet, whether it should be as a traditional communication service, whether it should be as a postal service, as e-commerce. Some countries are even considering regulation of the internet as a print media, and in some aspects as broadcasting or computer services. So having said that then, several, I would say, acts or regulations have been provided, and I think most of them were alluded to in the morning. The Communications Act of 1998, which talks about the use of a communication system. We also have the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act, the Data Protection Act, and Access to Information Act. And all these speak in some aspect, some kind of regulation over the internet. And I think that was the subject of today's discussions in the morning, where there are a multiplicity of regulations that apply to the media fraternity, and I think they need now to streamline that. Touching on whether content creators are getting a raw deal, I think this is an issue that has been spoken over, and I think in the last year or so, there was even a presidential directive in which the Communications Authority participated with a number of other stakeholders, which was addressing the issue of returns for local content creators. And with regard now to the multinationals that have been, I think, mentioned, the Googles and Facebooks, it would be important, and I think a speaker that spoke before, we talked about partnerships, bringing the regulators, the government, the content creators, and the media houses together. I think that is what has worked elsewhere, to sit these people on a round table, and so that then they are taken through the requirements and how our content creators can benefit from their works. It has been shown elsewhere that they not walk away, because they would be willing actually to sit and have discussions on the way forward. Chair, I think I leave it there, and I will be able to take probably any questions or clarifications later. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. for those insights from Communications Authority. You know, we're one of the regulators in this sector. You regulate broadcasters. And I think you have mentioned that there is no universal model of internet regulation, but it's dependent on a number of factors, including cultural outlook of the citizenship. And you have mentioned at least 4 acts that deal with internet regulation in Kenya, and I think these Maina and other people will be used to bring it a bit better. We have KICA Act, Kenya Information and Communications Act, Data Protection Act, Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018, Access to Information Act, and you have also mentioned the issue of royalties. And I think Communication Authority, you are being appointed by the President to work very closely with CMOs, that is content management organizations, collective management organizations, to ensure that everybody gets their fair of their work. And I don't know whether how much you are doing that. Maybe you are going to respond to that, Daktari. Our last speaker for the day is Mr. Henry Maina. Mr. Henry Maina is a commissioner with the Complaint Commission, that is a media council. So we work together with him. I'm on the other side as the media council, he's on the Complaint Commission. And he has a lot of experience in this field. He has a bit of legal knowledge on this, so we expect you, Bwana Maina, as you take the floor, to give us more and to give us those insights in terms of the legal application on this particular topic on intellectual property and internet regulation. Are the people getting a raw deal? Tell us about it. Karibu Bwana Maina.
3 minutes? I hope
Yes,
I'll manage.
3 minutes or 2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thanks, moderator and colleagues for raising the concerns. I think one, we must tell ourselves that the time given for this topic is not what it deserves. So we must find a way of getting back to have more time. And I have, in fact, begun by pointing out that this is going to be the most important discussion of our age. If we don't look at it from that perspective, then we are still doing everything as a norm, and we will not change the tide. But I must say that having listened to the keynote speaker, an intellectual by excellence, Dr. Sam Kamau, I must say I defer to the practitioners on the panel, and I've gained from the insights. But not to let down the people who put me on this panel, I had decided that I would ask a few questions, just perhaps to justify why they put me on it. I think the first question that you can decipher from the big question is, do content developers know about the copyright law? And if yes, does it work for them? So I would want us to frame that question differently. Do content developers know about the copyright law? And if yes, does it work for them? The second question is, does the regulation of the internet around issues of content liability, control, and neutrality unduly affect content developers? And the third question that I have raised was, how can content developers maximize the current regulation and technologies to fairly earn from their artworks? I made an assumption that reference to a raw deal means poor financial returns. But it could also mean just being pushed out of the market so that you die because your competition is far stronger. So let's not look at raw deal to just mean not getting money. But if there is unfair competition, then it tends to mess you up. And I think Victor Kopio made reference to this. I think that the first question may look naive. Do content developers know about copyright law? Because we have big players. We have Nation, we have Standard Group on this panel. It will look naive. And given that they've reinvigorated their presence digitally, I think we might be not asking the right question. But in reality, I think we do. Carol made reference to this, and in my notes I have put that there is a lot of copyright infringement for commercial use in Kenya. So before we go out there to get questioning the middlemen, as it were, the actors in Kenya must get their act right. People must respect each creator and accord them their due place. So that if you are using my content for commercial use, please acknowledge me. And this is even in the business model, the old business model. Who owns the copyright for journalistic work? Harry. Sometimes there are stories that journalists have not been paid for that are within our system. And we tend to use them as leads or follow-up later on, yet the journalists were not paid. So this very model is wrong. And Google and other middlemen have learned from our old practices and perfected it. So we must come back home and learn where we lost it. So to safeguard their creations and products, content developers must begin by respecting and adhering to copyright laws and shunning plagiarism and piracy within their staples. That's my first thing. The second part of this discussion is about what can we do about internet regulation. And Gilbert, I think, has laid the framework up there. So I don't want to repeat the law because the time is of essence. But we must realize that intermediaries can and do ban certain types of content. Usually, this censorship takes place outside the scope of internationally recognized governing principles on limitation of expression. So that is a challenge because intermediaries are doing this within contract law and sometimes not respecting just safeguards. I know of Kenyan publications that have been banned and nobody has explained why, who the complainant was, and there isn't transparency around there. So another way to start dealing with this argument is for us to introduce a process that brings transparency and accountability around the intermediaries. When you bring down content, what is the reason? And can you also perhaps have notice to notice so that before you take down, tell me who is this person complaining and why are they complaining about my content, as it were. And if we did that, increased transparency and perhaps the takedowns are on only serious criminality, then we begin to deal with that. But the third point and the last one which I wanted to make on this, which I said is a big issue, the issue that media houses have to create a platform, they have to change how they work. Technology offers an opportunity for smart contracts. Blockchain is the solution. People in Australia did certain experiments for them to be able to know what to ask of Google. They ran smart contracts and were able to say, our content generates for you this much. This is what we will be asking from you. Because for us, we want them to do the experiments for us and tell us how much our content sells. They will not reveal that. But using blockchain technology, we can fundraise for programs. You know, the Viewsas of this world can become owned by more Kenyans. And that is another way of ensuring it exists beyond an individual. If you open it for more funding from the population, journalism shall fund journalism. So it's owned by more people and not an individual. And two, that marketing and tracking of revenue is easy. And that would answer both the same question of Ruben Kagame's, that if we were using blockchain, the collective management organizations will not cheat. But as it is today, Kekobo is struggling. They have to chase matatus to get licenses so that they generate revenue for royalties. Technology can work on our side, but we must respect even the old laws as we try and improve them to get us where we are going. There is also a challenge in town about regulation. Where we were supposed to classify content, we are banning content. So the law says classify content. Yeah? We have adopted prohibition and banning to be equivalent in legal terms to classification. Classification meant that content that is 16 plus, and 16 was a foreign age. Because in the other jurisdictions, 16 is the age of majority. So we can't be still saying 16 plus in Kenya if the age of majority in Kenya is 18 plus. So we have to go back and check that law. Once we've done that, classification meant that this content exists, but it exists to different ages. It's not about totally banning it. Because if you ban wife material, yet it could have generated 1, sense of employment, 2, revenue to the country because you can tax them, then you've lost it. Just ensure that wife material gets to 18 plus. That's all we needed by classification. Banning does not help. Because sometimes it's going to be produced in the underworld and down there. What are we going to do? Would we ban YouTube in Kenya and manage? We will find ways of circumventing any firewalls that they may put. So, one, we must understand regulation better, and some, I think, made an indication to this. Understanding regulation better and asking ourselves, what are we regulating for? So reiterating that we are regulating for children is not enough, because I have 14 and 15-year-olds in my house, and because I have Wi-Fi, however much I put protection on TV, they have other gadgets that can help them go to internet. And so media, internet literacy for children, having proper educational systems, but allowing content that is adult to be there for purposes of developing the economy, allowing creatives to remain creatives, tax them, and guide them would help. So I'll end there. I've taken more time, but that's the danger of putting me last and wanting me to summarize everything, Mugwa. But I hope I've done justice to that.
Yes, you have done justice, and the issues that you have brought in are quite okay. And I'd like now to invite the audience, anybody with a question, so that we can allow our panelists to respond to any questions that you might have, so that we can now conclude. Do you have anybody with a question? Yes, let's hear a question. We are concluding it, so that we can conclude now in the next 2 minutes, which will be done.
Thank you. My name is Mercy Kinel, and I'm happy to see my former lecturer, Dr. Sam Kamau. So I want to ask on the issue of harassment of independent content creators. There was an issue some time back where a creator by the name of Edgar Barry was arrested, and a barrage of charges were put on him, and he was told that he had been committing fraud, among other charges. I wanted to know, what is the place of the Media Council, or CAK, in terms of protecting independent creators who might be able to help us in disseminating information, even though some may be personal, but what is the place of the CAK and the Media Council in protecting independent journalists, or say creators? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final question? Maybe I can allow Dr. Kamal and Maina to respond to
that. Okay, thank you so much. I think one, it's only in Kenya that sometimes we convolute processes. I'm an admirer of the space, and I've struggled to expand this space as much. I've gone to court to ensure that a number of laws that were carried over from the colonial times are declared unconstitutional. But there is something that also citizen journalists have done that perhaps existed with the legacy media, but on a very high platform. One is a process where people are using social media for blackmail. And when you mention the case of Gobare, it's a very sensitive case because realistically, there are cases of extortion and blackmail from him as a content creator. Two, there are cases of outright violation of data protection law, where he is trading on sensitive personal data. So we must bring him back. It is okay to be a content creator lawfully, but you can't just overrun the rights of others. So the very right that exists in 34, that we have a right to find media organizations, the right to privacy is equally in that chapter in Article 31. So we must bring that back. But two, that the Media Council exists and it will protect any journalist. But for you to be protected by the Media Council, you first must subscribe to the Code of Conduct by journalists. You see that? How do you subscribe to the Code of Conduct? You get accredited by the Media Council. By getting that accreditation, you have accepted and play ball by your standards. They will then come back to protect you. But there is this unholy relationship. When we want protection, we want to remind ourselves we are journalists. When we need to be in the bracket of people who ought to be protected, we say we are not journalists, we are bloggers, leave us alone. So we must find our definition. If citizen journalists want to be journalists and they want protection, please step up and you will be held by the standards of journalists. But if you're going to be a citizen journalist, remember all the other laws apply. The Defamation Act is not suspended just because you are a journalist. So the Copyright Act is not suspended just because you are a journalist. All laws apply. And we must find a way of bringing this sense back to ourselves. Because I have seen bloggers running to me for protection. That is the time they want to tell you, you know, I was exercising my media freedom. But in reality, they were either blackmailing or extorting money from somebody else. So a journalist who is inclined to criminal tendencies shall be punished by criminal law. But a journalist who is doing journalistic work shall be protected by the laws and the institutions that have been established as such. So happy to protect anyone who is pushed because they are exercising their professional grounds. But if you are engaging in criminal tendencies, then you will have to rely on other people to protect you. I hope that explains as best to some student.
So thank you very much, Madam Minor. I think because you are pressed for time, we are going to bring this to a close. And I would like, on behalf of Media Council, to thank all the panelists, Dr. Sam Kamau, Mr. Harry Misiko, Mr. Victor Capio, Ms. Carol Kimutai, Dr. Gilbert Bugeni, and Mr. Helen Minor for finding time and for coming over to discuss this important topic. We thank you very much, and we feel indebted for your time and contribution. So I think at this point in time, I'm going to let Mwakazi to give us further directions from here.
Big round of applause to Dr. Mbogo and the panelists, Asanteni Sana. Now, very quickly, by 3 p.m., we are expected to be back in the main room. So right now, we go straight for lunch. Please, on your way out, you will be given a voucher. Very critical to note that. Thank you so much once again. Let's meet at 3 p.m. in the main hall. Asanteni, God bless you.